Hi, welcome back on IAN's Health Talk with Dr. Akram. Today we are talking a special subject, stress, and how does it affect our life and how does it get carried on further into our next generation. And in our show, we have a special guest, Dr. Maz. He's a forensic psychiatrist and he's advising us how to deal with the stress and how to go ahead with it. And okay, let's go back to the show and there's a special question. This is all about children affected by or witnessing domestic abuse. Calls about children witnessing domestic abuse have risen by 25%. It's a BBC report. Some children are even resorting to sleep with their slippers on, so they are able to run away from their abused family. This is again a BBC report. Dr. Maz, what is in your opinion? Are we right with these things? You are in this sector. You're working with children in a vulnerable area.
Yeah, so you're correct to highlight this important issue that there has been an increase, a significant increase in reports and reporting of domestic abuse and violence, including child abuse. And many charities that work in this sector have reported a massive increase in calls to their helplines from children, reporting an increase in child abuse, including online, internet, and some of it may be related to children who are already identified as vulnerable. So there are a number of children that are already known to local authorities as vulnerable children. And some of them may not be. Some of them may have fallen under the radar. And generally speaking, in terms of the general population, since the lockdown, spending more time so close together in a family setting all the time continuously naturally may lead to arguments. So stress, conflict and tension in a family setting will result from an often large group of family or household members being forced to spend so much more time closer together than they have previously been used to. And that's a new experience for many families. Due to, for example, adults or parents working from home or homeschooling, and that was no longer happening, and children not being at school and being at home. So there's that population, that group of children, vulnerable children, who were at school during the day, and while they were at school, they were relatively safe. And they were getting fed and looked after, and they were safe at school for 6 hours in the day. And now they're not. Now they're at home, and perhaps they were already vulnerable and experiencing abuse in a domestic setting at home. And now, because of all the issues that we talked about before the break, that has increased the risk to them. And so I think these are some of the complex factors that might explain the significant increase.
Yeah, when we mean abuse, it's not only physical abuse, it's the mental abuse, which is really important as well, isn't it? Sometimes the families don't think when they abuse the children. This is like, sometimes it becomes a norm. They've been abused in their past somewhere, and they put the stress on the children, so they don't think that much, isn't it?
Yes, I think that's an important point to remind listeners and viewers that there are many different forms of harmful abuse that children experience. And it's not just physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, and emotional neglect.
That's an important point as well, yeah.
Neglect and emotional deprivation, a lack of nurturing, a lack of love, a lack of warmth from a parent or caregiver towards children, especially young children, can be very harmful and damaging and leave a lifelong impact on young children when they are in their early childhood.
That's true. It's not. But I think it's in families don't think that seriously. These small things they do constantly on the children that affects it. they carry on with them for a long time. Okay, what are good techniques to help calm someone? Especially, we're talking about children now, so let's see how we can advise the children or advise the mothers or the parents.
Yeah, I think there's I think many families and parents have developed their own strategies and things that have worked for them. But again, going back to the online charities and that have lots of help pages, I think again it's worth parents going online and looking at websites. For example, the NSPCC or Childline. Young Minds is another mental health charity for young children, and they recommend some common sense things, and it's worth reminding ourselves of what they are, that at a time of increased stress and frustration in the home setting, it's important to talk about feelings and worries openly in a family setting with children, talk about people's anxieties and fears and worries about coronavirus, and also to acknowledge to children, including young children, who might be worried about illness or dying. I think many younger children...
Yeah, that's really important, yeah.
Younger children may be very worried about catching coronavirus, dying, or family members or parents dying, grandparents getting sick and dying. So I think it's important to acknowledge and appreciate their genuine fears and concerns, and where appropriate, if the child is old enough or mature enough to be talking about serious illness or death. In a very general sense, particularly if there is a family member or a neighbour or friend who has been seriously ill or worse, unfortunately may have lost their life. And I think it's important to include children in those conversations. The other thing I would say, I think it's good advice that I do read, that this issue of rolling 24/7 media, news, particularly news and social media, that can cause a lot of anxiety and fuel anxiety, and make people feel even more stressed.
So you're telling about reading social media all the time causes anxiety?
Rolling 24/7 cable news,
all right,
internet news and social media news. I think that sometimes can be unhelpful or increase anxiety, and so I would recommend limit viewing time, both television news and also online social media, and I would recommend not leaving the news on in the background all the time, all day, and limiting time periods, very short defined time periods, maybe 1 or 2 hours twice a day, when people are catching up with what's happening in the news and developments, and particularly for children, younger children, balancing screen time, and what is appropriate for a 15-year-old child will not be appropriate for a 5-year-old child in terms of screen time. That's both television and iPad or smartphone, and so I think it's important to balance that depending on the child.
That's two good points you elaborated there. One is reading about these issues. I think even when I was reading for this program, I was researching a lot, and I realized even though I'm a parent and I work as a doctor, still there are lots of things we learn from these websites. It's not they are there for no one, isn't it? They give lots of information. The second thing is really important is the television. You're watching television throughout. Is the news. It's keep telling the same thing again. Always sad news. It puts you in this sad mode, isn't it?
Yes, I think it can increase anxiety and worries in not just in children but in adults as well. You know, I've been guilty of that myself, following news very closely for long periods of time. Sometimes is not helpful and can increase stress. So I've implemented that for myself. I've limited and reduced the amount of time that I spend reading news online.
There is a question coming from audience. It says, is there stress and hair loss? Does it do anything to do with it? Is it very common? Stress and hair loss.
I do hear that. I do hear that a lot. I don't know. I mean, it's outside my area of expertise.
I know,
I don't know
that's a difficult one. Yeah.
Scientific evidence for that is. We talked about stress generally, didn't we? We talked about the way stress can affect our bodies and our health. And so generally, if we are under a lot of stress for a long period of time, that's not going to be good for our physical health and including our immune systems. And stress actually behaves and acts like an immunosuppressant. So our immune systems will not be working as well or as healthily at times of stress, which is another reason why it's important to try and control and reduce stress where possible.
There's another question coming. This is about the toys they are marketed in the shops, like stress relieving toys, like these small games and puzzles and all, spinners and all these things, punching things. Do they have anything to help them, or what is in your experience?
Yeah. I mean, they've been around a long time. So the stress balls or cushions, they've been around a very long time. Some people do feel that helps. It's beneficial, and so I would say if people find it works for them, then that's absolutely fine.
It's absolutely fine. Yeah.
There's also evidence that in children with attention deficit disorder, ADHD, there's good evidence that these fidget games and fidget spinners and things, they're helpful.
That's quite interesting. You talked about ADHD. I think we got a program planned in about 2 weeks about ADHD, and we'll talk more about it. But I can remember when I was a medical student, when I used to get stressed before the exams, I used to take a tennis ball and a racket, and I used to go, and there was a big building block, and I used to keep hitting that ball to that wall, and it comes back, and after about half an hour was completely shattered, and my stress would have been gone by then. I think then that's one of them. Probably even punching bags, that also might take some certain amount of the stress, isn't it?
Yes, so we haven't talked about physical activity or exercise at all, really, as a way of managing stress. And of course, that's
physical activity, yes.
Well known and well established, evidence-based intervention, which significantly reduces stress and improves health, exercise and physical activity.
Exercise and physical activity. That's a really important point. That's true. And this is again, how can we divert our minds from situations like this, what's going on in and around? If you are in that household, how can you isolate yourself and keep your mind away from what's going on there?
I think structure is very important. I think it's important to create structure and routine. A lack of routine and structure makes people feel anxious and stressed. They don't know what's going to happen from hour to hour or what's going to happen for the rest of the day. So I think it's useful to make a rota or a timetable. If children are at home being homeschooled, it's really important to have a timetable. Children do benefit from structure to their day. And that's provided at school. So it's important to have a timetable, have a rota. It doesn't just have to be for school activities. It can be for physical activity, for games, for leisure activities, so that children and adults can plan their day. They know what's happening. That's a good way of managing anxiety and stress.
That's a very good point. That's even I haven't thought about that. Making a timetable when you don't have nothing to do at home. So at least you do something in a different fashion rather than you just sit down and you get bored. That's a very good point. In the end, what are there any helplines for the children? Do you have anything out for them to call or chat or?
Probably the most common and well-known charities that have helplines and very good websites are mental health charities like Mind. There's one called Rethink Mental Illness. Samaritans, most people will have heard of Samaritans, which provide a 24/7 helpline for people who are struggling with their emotional and mental health. There's also a charity called SANE, which provide emotional support. And then I mentioned Childline a bit earlier, the NSPCC and Young Minds. So all of these have excellent websites and lots of useful information online. And it may be worth making those contact details or phone numbers available on the web pages or Facebook pages of your program, in case people have some difficulty getting hold of the contact details.
That's a very good point, and because it's a live program, and people who are watching us, if you have any questions, you can send us to our email address, or you could write on our Facebook link, and we will come back to you with our advice or answers for whatever you need. Okay. In the end, let's talk about what are the positive effects of this lockdown. The families are staying together, and there's less traffic. There's your expenses are certain amount is been low because you're not going to town centre and spending that much of money. But what are these positive effects? What we are going to take forward and be happy of?
Yeah, I mean, for some people, but certainly not all, being confined or isolated at home with families has given some people opportunities to have more positive experiences of family life. For example, previously busy working parents perhaps spending more time with their children, trying to spend more quality time, homeschooling, family members trying to get to know one another in more depth, because previously people had very busy school lives or working lives. Perhaps there's more leisure time, more play time for children, giving more attention to one another. Some families have managed to use the time to increase teamwork, working together, looking after oneself better, looking after yourself better. Eating more healthily. We haven't talked about diet at all, really. It's about using the opportunity to cook more, eat more healthily. We mentioned exercise, praying or meditating. That's useful.
That's a very important point. Praying and meditating. That helps, yeah.
Yeah, and we haven't talked about using spaces, quiet time and quiet spaces in the home. Even if there's a large family and there's not a lot of space, trying to identify a small space, a dedicated space in the daytime where individual family members have quiet time alone, private time.
That is very important point, isn't it? Because sometimes people live in large families, a lot of children, aunties, uncles, and all these things. Is giving that particular time for one person to just go and relax for short time, half an hour, 1 hour, that makes a big difference.
It does, and I think it is possible to do that if there's a dedicated space in the house or in a room somewhere where family members can take turns to have some quiet time alone. I think that's very important. But, you know, I must stress, and I think we must recognise that many families have been and are under huge pressure and face massive daily challenges under conditions of isolation and lockdown, and many people and families will unfortunately not have the luxury or opportunity to experience lockdown as a positive experience, both for themselves and their families, for all the reasons that we've already talked about and discussed. And for those people that it is possible, I would advise take some time to think about things that you would like to do once the lockdown has lifted or eased and life begins to return to some form of normality. It's important to look to the future and try and keep some optimism and hope. And finally, I would advise parents that are watching and listening, in particular parents with young children, or teenagers as well, to get to know their children better and find out what your children like, find out what they don't like, try to understand your children's needs, what your children's wishes are and preferences, and hopefully that should address some of the issues that we've talked about early in the programme.
That's quite interesting. It's like you're spending time together and try to understand each other, the family member, because we always had this busy life, isn't it? Like father is busy in the city or is working in the town, mother is doing something else. The weekend comes, you go in the shopping run, and now we are all calm down, spend more time and talk to the family. That's a very good point. Dr. Maz, it was our pleasure to have you here. We have had lots of interesting topics and we talked. It was a short time, but even during short time, we have covered as much as possible about stress and how to come out of stress. And thank you very much. Do you like to say anything to our audience in the end? What is your take-home message?
I think the take-home message is don't suffer in silence alone. Seek help and support. Professional services are available. They are open. Please make use of them. Make use of families, friends, neighbours. Get advice. Get help and support. Don't suffer in silence alone.
Dr. Maz, thank you very much. It was our pleasure to have you on Iron's Health Talk with Dr. Akram. Until we see you probably next time and with more information for our viewers. Until then, it was really nice to talk about all these stress-related problems, and hopefully you would get a lot of information from this. This is a just eye-opener, our program. You could read a lot in the internet in these days, and there are lots of YouTube clips which I watched and which I have gained a lot of ideas and experience from this. Please watch them. This is a good time for you to develop your skills and learn more about it. Medicine is not difficult. When it's said in layman's language, you can understand it, even if it's a not medical person. It was my pleasure to have you all in this show again. And until we see you in a similar program next time, goodbye, take care, look after yourselves.